Every war produces a few techniques that outlive the battlefield. Some come from official manuals, others from field improvisation, and then there are the rare few that soldiers protect and swear by, as if they're sacred. Among World War I veterans, one survival trick gained an almost mythical reputation. It wasn't a weapon, it wasn't a piece of gear, and it wasn't tied to rank. It was a deceptively simple method that kept men alive in the mud, cold, disease, and chaos of trench warfare. When soldiers passed it to one another, they didn't treat it as strategy. They treated it as something that simply worked when nothing else did. Most people today have never heard of it. But for anyone who appreciates history, fieldcraft, or survival, this forgotten World War I method still has real value, both as a piece of wartime ingenuity and as a practical tool that can be used today. The trick originated from trench conditions that destroyed both equipment and the human body. World War I trenches were a perfect storm of wet soil, stagnant water, freezing nights, and relentless bacterial growth. Boots rotted in weeks, bandages stayed damp, rifles clogged with mud. Even seasoned soldiers underestimated how destructive the environment itself would be. The constant dampness pulled heat from the body and created conditions where infections spread faster than wounds could heal. Commanders noticed that the men weren't just fighting the enemy, they were fighting the trench. This forced soldiers to look for anything that could give them an edge against the cold, the moisture, and the infections. And that's where the trick began. It started as a rumour among troops, then became common knowledge, then gained the reputation of being magic because it worked so consistently. It was called trench grease, an old mixture that protected skin and gear and kept men alive long enough to fight. The method relied on a simple handmade grease that created a barrier against moisture and infection. Trench grease was not the same as modern petroleum jelly or ointments. Soldiers made it using ingredients that were widely available even behind the front lines. The core was animal fat, usually pig or beef tallow, which they heated gently until it liquefied. Then they blended in beeswax for structure and a small amount of resin or pine tar when available to improve water resistance. Once it cooled, it formed a paste that could be spread over skin, leather, canvas, and even wood. What made trench grease legendary wasn't its composition, but the results. Soldiers who coated their feet daily, rubbed it into their boots and applied it to gear saw dramatic improvements. Feet stayed dry longer. Blisters healed faster. Sores didn't get infected as easily. Leather stayed flexible in the cold. Even rifle stocks were protected from swelling and warping. For men trapped for weeks in cold, wet trenches without the ability to fully dry their gear, trench grease became a shield that modern fabrics hadn't yet evolved to provide. Soldiers learned that daily application was more effective than any piece of equipment. The key to the method wasn't occasional use. Soldiers who treated trench grease as part of their daily routine were the ones who reaped the biggest benefits. Entire regiments adopted a simple process. Apply a thick layer to the feet in the morning, rub extra into the heels, slide socks on, and reapply after long marches or extended rain. This sealed the skin, prevented raw spots from forming, and helped stop trench foot before it started. In harsh winter conditions, a small amount rubbed onto exposed skin acted as a windbreak, reducing frostbite during night watches. On gear, especially leather belts, cartridge pouches and boot seams, the grease helped waterproof the material. This additional layer prevented water from seeping into stitching or fibres, extending the life of equipment that would otherwise deteriorate. When veterans talked about trench grease, they didn't describe it as a luxury. They described it as something that kept them functional when others were breaking down. That practicality is why so many soldiers swore by it, especially in the later years of the war. This World War I trick can still be recreated today with simple steps and real-world uses. Modern survivalists and historical reenactors often overlook trench grease, even though it can be easily made at home and used in the field. To recreate it, all you need is animal tallow, beeswax and pine resin. Start by melting the tallow on low heat. Add beeswax until the mixture thickens slightly. Then stir in a small amount of pine resin to improve waterproofing and scent preservation. When the mixture cools, it becomes a firm paste that softens with body heat. In practical terms, this mixture works exceptionally well in cold weather hikes, long-distance treks, or wet environments. Applied to the feet, it reduces friction and moisture. Applied to boots, it repels water and restores the flexibility of leather. For outdoorsmen who build shelters, a thin layer rubbed onto wooden tool handles prevents swelling after exposure to rain. One of the best uses, especially for long-term wilderness stays, is coating the inside stitching of boots before winter. This protects the thread, which is often the first part to deteriorate in wet conditions. Even modern nylon thread boots benefit from an external seal that keeps water from penetrating seams. Understanding this forgotten method gives us insight into how soldiers survived the trenches. World War I trench life demanded resilience, discipline, and constant adaptation. Soldiers didn't have modern waterproof fabrics, antibiotics, or advanced boot technology. They had to rely on methods that worked with the materials at hand. Trench grease became one of the most reliable life-saving tools of the entire war, not because it was glamorous or technologically advanced, but because it addressed the fundamental threats that soldiers faced every single day. It remains one of the clearest examples of practical, field-tested ingenuity that still holds value more than a century later. For anyone studying history, outdoor survival, or traditional skills, this World War I trick is worth preserving, not as nostalgia, but as a proven method you can still use today. If this deep dive into overlooked wartime survival knowledge was valuable to you, subscribe to In the Beginning and share this guide with fellow history and survival enthusiasts. There are many more forgotten techniques on the way.